The dawn over Wyoming was pale and cold, a thin veil of mist creeping across the open plains. The air smelled of damp earth and last night's dew, heavy with the silence of a world not yet awake. Mary Whitlock walked through that silence, her boots scuffing the dirt path, leaving faint, determined tracks. Her cotton dress, patched at the hem and faded from years of wear, was damp with morning moisture, but she didn't slow her stride. She carried a canvas satchel across her shoulder, its shape suggesting little more than a few personal belongings, and, tucked carefully inside, an old leather-bound Bible that had belonged to her father. She had been walking since before first light, the pale horizon pulling her forward. Her breath came out in steady puffs, visible in the cool air. Anyone who saw her, alone on that winding trail, miles from the nearest town, would wonder why. But Mary wasn't a woman easily swayed by fear or doubt, not anymore. 15 miles behind her lay Cheyenne, a place she had no wish to remember. Ahead was the homestead of a man she'd never met, but whose name she'd heard whispered among ranch hands and traders, Ethan Cole. They said he was a recluse, a man who had no patience for strangers, and even less for women. But she wasn't here for pleasantries. She was here because her father's land, his last legacy, would turn to dust unless she learned to care for it. And that meant learning the ways of cattle. Mary adjusted her satchel and pushed a damp strand of hair behind her ear. She had known hardship before. The sting of prairie winters, the loneliness of being widowed at 30, the weight of debts left behind by a husband who had abandoned her heart long before he abandoned this earth. Yet as she approached the weathered wooden gate ahead, she felt something new, a fluttering nervousness, as if the land itself was testing her resolve. The rhythmic thunk of an axe striking wood cut through the mist. Beyond the gate, in the yard of a modest but sturdy ranch house, a man was at work. Ethan Cole stood like a silhouette carved from the earth itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of iron and a face lined by both sun and sorrow, he looked every bit the image of a man who had seen more winters than joys. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to the elbow, revealing forearms marked with scars and hardened by years of labor. Each swing of the axe was precise, the kind of movement born of habit rather than thought. When Mary's boots crunched on the gravel near the gate, he stopped mid-swing. "Morning," she called, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. Ethan turned, squinting at her through the mist. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, studied her with a quiet, guarded intensity. "You're a long way from town," he said, his voice rough like timber dragged across stone. "I know," Mary answered, tightening her grip on the gatepost. "My name's Mary Whitlock. I inherited a small piece of land from my father, just north of here." She paused, measuring her words. "I want to learn how to take care of cattle, how to milk a cow especially. People said you're the best man for such things." Ethan leaned on the axe handle, the faintest trace of surprise flickering across his expression. "You came all this way," he said slowly, "to learn how to milk a cow?" "Yes," she met his stare, unflinching. "I don't want to rely on anyone's charity. I want to work. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. There was a silence between them, filled only by the distant call of a meadowlark and the creaking of the gate under Mary's hand. Ethan studied her a moment longer, his gaze steady and unreadable. He had met women like her before, or so he thought. Women who came with smooth words or desperate eyes, who needed something he wasn't willing to give. But there was something different about this one. Her voice wasn't pleading, and there was no trace of flirtation or guile. She was direct, honest. "You've got a long walk back to Cheyenne if I say no," he said, testing her. "Then I'll walk it," Mary replied, her tone calm but resolute. "But I'd rather stay and work for the lessons. Whatever you need done, mending fences, feeding stock, I'll do it. Just teach me." For a moment, neither spoke. The mist swirled around them, the sun just beginning to break over the horizon, painting the clouds a soft rose gold. Ethan finally sighed and planted the axe in the woodblock beside him. 2 weeks, he said. Sunrise lessons. You do what I say when I say it. No questions. No personal talk. He fixed her with a look as sharp as a spur. Understand? Mary nodded. Understood. Something in her tone, in the unwavering line of her shoulders, stirred a faint memory in Ethan, of another time, long ago, when he'd known someone with the same steel in her voice. He turned, grabbed his gloves from the fence post, and gestured toward the barn. You'll find work boots inside the tack room. You can't be trailing around in those city shoes. Mary followed him through the gate, her heart thumping with both relief and unease. The ranch spread out before her, an expanse of dry earth, weathered fence lines, and a barn that bore the scars of countless winters. It wasn't much to look at, but there was a quiet dignity to it. She took in the details as they walked. The sagging porch with a rocking chair that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The rows of firewood neatly stacked along the wall. The sturdy corral where a few Holstein cows grazed lazily in the pale morning light. Ethan walked ahead, his boots crunching against the packed earth. He didn't speak, but Mary could sense the weight he carried, the kind of silence that came not from shyness, but from years of choosing to live apart from the world. "You've lived here long?" she asked cautiously. "Long enough," came his curt reply. Mary bit her lip, but didn't press further. She wasn't here to pry. She had come with a single purpose, and she would not risk losing the chance to learn because of idle questions. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and leather mingled with the faint sweetness of milk. Sunlight pierced through cracks in the walls, casting golden lines across the straw-strewn floor. Mary paused, resting a hand on the doorframe. "This place," she murmured softly, "it feels alive." Ethan gave her a sidelong glance. "It's just a barn." "Maybe to you," she said, "but to someone like me who's been living without roots." She stopped herself. Too personal. Too soon. Ethan didn't answer. He fetched a pair of old work gloves and a stool, setting them down by the nearest cow. "We'll start tomorrow at sunrise. You're tired. Best get some rest while you can." Mary hesitated. "Where?" "There's a bunkhouse out back," he said, nodding toward a small structure behind the barn. "It's old, but it'll keep the wind off you." As the sun rose higher, Mary stood at the barn's open door, taking in the wide horizon. The land stretched endlessly. Rolling plains and distant mountains, their peaks kissed by morning light. She felt a strange mix of fear and peace, like stepping into a story much larger than herself. Ethan, meanwhile, stood a few paces away, watching her without speaking. There was something about her, something that reminded him of the man he used to be before betrayal hardened his heart. When Mary turned to meet his gaze, neither looked away. In that quiet moment, an unspoken truth passed between them. Their paths had crossed for a reason neither could yet name. When Mary Whitlock stepped through that weathered gate, neither she nor Ethan Cole knew that their lives were about to change forever. The first light of dawn spilled over the Wyoming plains, bathing the barn in a pale golden glow. Mary Whitlock stood at the threshold, fingers tightening around the wooden frame, as if holding her breath before crossing into a new life. The air inside was warm and heavy with the scent of hay, leather, and livestock. A soft rustle came from the far stall, where Bessie, the gentlest of Ethan's Holstein cows, flicked her tail lazily. Ethan Cole was already there, sleeves rolled to his elbows, methodically filling a feed trough. He didn't turn when she entered, but his voice, gruff and steady, filled the quiet barn. "Morning comes early here," he said. "You're late." Mary glanced at the faint light outside and frowned. "It's barely sunrise." "Then you'll learn," he replied, finally turning toward her with a faint smirk that barely touched his eyes. "Cattle don't care what time you rise. They care about routine, and routine starts before the day does." Mary took a hesitant step closer. The barn felt larger than it looked from outside, its high beams swallowed in shadows, rays of sunlight slicing through cracks in the planks. Every detail, the creak of the wooden floor, the scent of warm hay, was both foreign and strangely comforting. Ethan led her to the stall where Bessie stood, chewing calmly, her black and white coat glossy under the slanting light. "Start by letting her know you're there," he instructed. "Cows spook easy if you come at 'em like a storm." Mary nodded, swallowing the lump of nerves in her throat. She approached slowly, extending a tentative hand toward Bessie's shoulder. The cow shifted slightly, her large brown eyes blinking with mild curiosity. "She won't bite," Ethan muttered, "but she can kick. Stay clear of her hind legs." Mary knelt by the side of the cow, copying Ethan's movements as he showed her how to place the stool and bucket. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the udder, trying to remember his exact instructions. "Not like that," Ethan said, his voice firm but not unkind. He crouched beside her, his hands moving with a practiced rhythm. "It's not about pulling. Think of it as coaxing. Squeeze gently, top to bottom. Feel the motion, not the force." Mary tried again. This time a thin stream of milk struck the side of the bucket, the sound sharp and satisfying. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Better," Ethan said, watching her form with an intensity that made her more self-conscious than she cared to admit. "Keep your hands steady." It's all about rhythm. They worked in silence for a few minutes, broken only by the sound of milk hitting metal and the occasional shift of Bessie's weight. Mary's arms began to ache, and she bit her lip to stifle a groan. "Hurts, doesn't it?" Ethan asked, as if reading her mind. "A little," she admitted. "Good. That means you're working. First day's always the worst. Tomorrow, your hands will shake less." Mary glanced up at him, sweat glistening on her brow despite the cool morning. "How long did it take you to learn?" Ethan's eyes darkened, his gaze flickering to some distant memory. "Long enough," he said simply, and returned to stacking hay bales. By the second morning, Mary arrived before the first streaks of light broke across the horizon. Her muscles were sore from the day before, arms heavy, hands stiff, but she refused to show it. Ethan was already outside, splitting logs in the yard with a rhythm so precise it seemed more like meditation than work. "You're early," he remarked, without looking up. "You said sunrise," she replied, her voice steady. "I thought I'd start before the sun does." He gave her a small nod of approval and tossed another log onto the pile. "Good. Let's see if you remember what I taught you yesterday." The barn had become less intimidating overnight. Mary no longer hesitated at the door. She walked in with a quiet determination that Ethan couldn't ignore. Bessie, sensing her presence, gave a soft grunt and shuffled her weight. Mary fetched the stool and bucket without waiting for instruction. "Remember, calm and steady," Ethan said, leaning against a post as he watched. Mary crouched by Bessie, hands trembling slightly as she started the motion he'd shown her. A thin stream of milk struck the bucket on the first try, and a spark of pride lit up her face. "Better," Ethan muttered, almost to himself. It took nearly half an hour to fill the bucket, but she didn't complain once. When her arms quivered with fatigue, she gritted her teeth and pushed through. Ethan, used to seeing people quit at the first sign of discomfort, found himself oddly impressed. Over the next few days, the routine grew familiar. Mary rose early, tending to the cattle under Ethan's guidance. She learned how to carry heavy buckets without spilling, how to rake the straw evenly across the stalls, and how to coax stubborn cows into position with a firm but gentle hand. Her palms, once smooth and pale, grew rougher with calluses. Each time she looked down at them, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. Ethan remained distant in conversation, but his watchful eyes followed her progress. He noticed how she hummed softly while working, sometimes old hymns, sometimes songs he didn't recognize. Her voice was low and soothing, and the cows seemed to respond to it. One morning, as she hummed a faint melody of "Nearer, My God, to Thee," Ethan paused mid-step. It had been years since he'd heard that hymn. His mother used to sing it while kneading bread in the kitchen, her voice carrying through the walls of a home long gone. For a fleeting moment, he wasn't in a barn with Mary. He was a boy again, watching his mother at work, feeling safe in a world that no longer existed. "You sing," he said, startling her. Mary looked up, surprised. "Only when I work. It helps me think." "You sound like—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Never mind." She smiled faintly. "My father used to say, music keeps a person's spirit from breaking, even when their body is tired." Ethan didn't reply, but something in his expression softened. By the fourth morning, the silence between them was no longer heavy. It was comfortable. Ethan began to offer small pointers without his usual sharpness. He showed her how to check a cow's hooves, how to spot when one was restless or in discomfort. Mary listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't just learning to care for cattle. She was learning the rhythm of a life built on patience, repetition, and quiet strength. And though neither of them said it, they both sensed that something was shifting, something that had nothing to do with cows or chores. By the fifth morning, Mary moved through the barn as though she had always belonged there. She tied her hair back with a piece of worn ribbon, rolled her sleeves up, and set to work without a word. Her movements were still clumsy in places, but Ethan could no longer deny the determination in her every gesture. That morning, as she milked Bessie, she began to hum again, soft and low, a melody that blended with the sounds of the waking barn. It wasn't a song Ethan recognized this time, but there was a haunting sweetness to it. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and listened. "Where'd you learn that tune?" he asked when she paused to stretch her aching fingers. Mary glanced up, surprised. "My father. He used to sing it in the evenings when the sun was sinking and the cattle were quiet. Said it was a prayer as much as a song." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Sounds like a hymn." She smiled faintly. "Most of his songs were. He believed work and faith went hand in hand. Said that if a man didn't work with his hands, he couldn't feel God's blessings." Ethan's jaw tightened at that. He hadn't thought about faith in years, not since betrayal had hollowed him out and left him questioning the purpose of everything he'd once held dear. And yet, hearing Mary speak, he felt something stir, like a faint ember flickering in a hearth long thought cold. Later that day, while she hauled buckets of water from the well, Ethan found himself watching her again. Not just the way she worked, but the way she carried herself, strong despite the strain, quiet despite the endless tasks. There was no bitterness in her, no sense of entitlement, just a quiet, resolute will that reminded him of the kind of people who survived the harsh Wyoming plains. "You don't complain much," he said, approaching her as she wiped sweat from her brow. Mary chuckled softly. "Would it change the work if I did?" He raised an eyebrow. "No, but most folks I've seen wouldn't stick it out past the first day." "I'm not most folks." She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I'm trying to build something that lasts. Complaining won't get me there." Ethan studied her face for a moment, as if searching for cracks in her resolve, but found none. He gave a slow nod, a rare gesture of approval. That evening, after the day's work was done, the two of them sat on the porch steps. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky in bands of orange and rose. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was filled with the quiet hum of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Mary broke the silence first. "Your land, it's beautiful, harsh but beautiful." Ethan glanced out over the fields, his hands resting on his knees. "It's not much. Just dirt and fences."
"Maybe," she said, "but it feels alive, like it remembers the people who've worked it." Ethan's gaze flickered to her. Land doesn't remember, people do, and sometimes that's the problem. There was a weight in his words, something unspoken that Mary sensed but didn't press. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out her father's Bible. She set it on her lap, running her fingers over the worn cover. "He used to say this book held more than just faith," she murmured. "It held history, the story of our family. Every note he scribbled in the margins, every verse he underlined." She looked down, her voice softening. "When he died, this was all I had left." Ethan said nothing, but the look in his eyes was different now, less guarded, more human. The following days carried a rhythm: sunrise, work, the steady sound of milk hitting the bottom of the pail. But beneath that rhythm, Ethan began to notice little things about Mary that didn't quite fit. She was quick to smile at the cattle, quick to hum softly as she worked, yet sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her face changed.
Her eyes would fix on the horizon, as if searching for something or someone. There was a tension in her posture, a slight tremor in her hands, that told him her mind was elsewhere. One morning, as they finished stacking hay in the loft, Ethan found her standing at the barn door, staring out at the long road that stretched toward Cheyenne. The early light caught in her hair, but there was nothing soft about her expression. It was tight, guarded. "You expecting company?" Ethan asked, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Mary jumped slightly at his voice. "No, why would I be?" He shrugged. "You've been looking out that way for 3 mornings straight. Thought maybe you were waiting for someone to ride up." Mary's lips curved into a faint, unconvincing smile. "I just like to know what's coming down the road." Ethan narrowed his eyes, but he let it go. At least for now. Later that day, while she worked with Bessie, Ethan lingered near the barn wall, his arms crossed. He watched her hands, stronger now, steadier than on the first day. "You're improving," he said. She glanced up with a hint of pride. "I'm trying." "Trying doesn't keep you alive out here," he replied. "Out here, you either learn quick or the land chews you up. So tell me." He paused, his voice lowering. "Why are you really here, Mary? A woman doesn't walk 15 miles just to learn to milk a cow." Mary froze, her hands still on the bucket. For a moment it looked like she might answer, but then she straightened and brushed her palms on her dress. "We all have pasts, Mr. Cole," she said evenly. "Mine doesn't matter anymore." "Doesn't matter, or you don't want to talk about it?" Her eyes flickered to his, steady and unblinking. "Maybe both." Ethan didn't push her further. He'd learned long ago that some truths only came out when the time was right. That evening, Mary stayed late in the barn to finish cleaning. Ethan stood at the doorway, watching her kneel on the straw, sleeves rolled, her hair loose from its braid. There was something almost solemn in the way she moved, like a prayer made of work. When she rose, he noticed the small leather Bible tucked into her satchel. It looked old, worn from years of handling. "You carry that everywhere," Ethan said quietly. Mary glanced at the Bible, then back at him. "It was my father's. He said it would keep me safe, even when he couldn't." Her fingers tightened on the strap of her satchel. "I suppose it's the only thing I trust to watch my back." There was a shadow in her words that made Ethan pause. He thought of asking more, but her tone carried a finality that stopped him. That night, long after Mary had gone to the bunkhouse, Ethan sat on the porch with his rifle leaning against the wall beside him. He stared out at the dark plains, listening to the wind move through the grass. Something in his gut told him Mary's story wasn't as simple as she claimed. And in Wyoming, secrets had a way of drawing trouble. The morning sun was a fierce orange streak across the horizon when Ethan found the first sign. He was making his usual walk along the fence line when his boot caught a fresh hoof print pressed into the soft earth near the eastern boundary. It wasn't from his cattle. He knew every track they made. This one was deeper, sharper. A rider had passed through recently, maybe late in the night. He crouched down, brushing a hand over the print, and followed it a few paces. A second print joined the first, the marks heading north toward the road. Whoever it was, they hadn't stopped to chat. By the time he returned to the barn, Mary was already at work, humming softly as she hauled water buckets. "You see anyone out here this morning?" he asked casually. She glanced over her shoulder, startled by his tone. "No. Why?" Ethan watched her for a moment, then shook his head. Tracks. Someone's been riding through. Mary froze, her fingers tightening on the bucket handle. "Couldn't be anyone," she said quickly. "Plenty of travelers use the road." "Not this close to the fence line," Ethan replied, his voice low and measured. "Most folks keep their distance unless they've got business. And this," he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, "this doesn't feel like chance." For the rest of the morning, Mary's usual calm was gone. She moved faster, glancing toward the horizon more than once. Ethan noticed, though he said nothing. Every instinct in him was whispering the same warning. Something was coming. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ethan found Mary sitting outside the bunkhouse, the old Bible open on her lap. She wasn't reading. Her gaze was distant, fixed on the road that cut through the valley like a scar. "Who are you watching for?" he asked, leaning against the railing. She startled slightly, then snapped the book shut. "No one." "Mary," his voice softened, but it carried the weight of experience. "I've seen that look before. It's the look of someone waiting for trouble to find them." Her jaw tightened. "Maybe I just don't like surprises." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said at last. "But if you've got enemies, I need to know. I won't have danger walking into my barn without warning." Mary lowered her gaze. "It's not like that," she murmured. I just have reasons for being careful." The next morning, a distant sound carried on the wind, a faint, rhythmic pounding. Ethan stiffened. He stepped out onto the porch and listened. It was the unmistakable beat of hooves. From the bunkhouse, Mary emerged, her face pale. She clutched her satchel tightly, as if preparing to flee. "You hear that too?" Ethan said, his tone flat. Mary nodded but said nothing. The sound faded, moving west, but it left a weight in the air that neither could shake. Ethan turned to her, his eyes sharp. "You know who's out there, don't you?" Mary's lips parted, but no words came. For a moment he saw fear flicker in her eyes, raw and unhidden. That night, Ethan sat on the porch again, the rifle across his lap. The wind was colder now, carrying with it the unease of a land that had seen too many fights and too many ghosts. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the hills, someone was riding. He could feel it. And from the way Mary locked the bunkhouse door and whispered a prayer before bed, he knew she felt it too. The wind turned restless by the 6th day, carrying the scent of rain. Gray clouds gathered over the Wyoming plains, their shadows sweeping across the ranch like dark wings. Mary worked silently that morning, her braid loose and damp against her back. Ethan noticed the faint tremor in her hands as she reached for the milking stool. "You're distracted," he said, leaning against the stall. "What's on your mind?" She paused, staring into the pail. "Do you ever feel like the past won't let go, no matter how far you run?" Ethan's jaw tightened. It was a question he understood all too well. "Every damned day." Mary looked up, their eyes meeting. There was something in her gaze, pain, but also a spark of hope. That evening, the rain came, tapping against the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. The barn smelled of damp wood and hay.
Ethan found Mary sitting by the open door, watching the storm roll over the horizon. "Storm's gonna be bad," he said, stepping inside. "You should get some rest." "I like the rain," she replied, hugging her knees. "When I was little, I used to sit on the porch with my father and listen to storms. He said thunder was God's way of reminding us he's still there, even when the world feels empty." Ethan sat down a few feet from her, his boots creaking against the floor. "Your father sounds like a wise man." Mary's smile was soft, but tinged with sorrow. "He was. He taught me everything I know about faith, about standing tall, even when life tries to break you." For a while, they listened to the rain together. The sound filled the silence between them, washing away the rough edges of the day. Ethan found himself remembering a time, long ago, when he used to talk like that, when he believed in something beyond the horizon. "I used to have faith," he admitted quietly. "But life has a way of taking things from you, until you've got nothing left to believe in." Mary turned to him, her voice steady. "Maybe you just need to remember where to look. Faith isn't gone, Ethan. It's just waiting for you to find it again." Later, as the storm eased, Ethan lit the lantern in the barn. Mary helped him gather tools and feed for the next day, their hands brushing now and then. Each time, Ethan felt a jolt he couldn't explain, a warmth that had nothing to do with the lantern's glow. "You've learned faster than I expected," he said, breaking the quiet as they worked. Mary laughed softly. "Guess I've had good teaching." He looked at her then, really looked. The determination, the resilience, the quiet strength in her eyes, it stirred something deep within him, something he thought he'd buried years ago. By the end of the second week, the distance between them had narrowed, though neither spoke of it. Mary moved through the barn with confidence now, her hands sure and practiced. Ethan found himself looking forward to her presence, to the sound of her voice in a place that had known nothing but silence for so long. One night, as they stood on the porch watching the last of the storm fade, Mary glanced at him and said, "You've been kind to me, Ethan, more than you had to be. I won't forget it." He held her gaze, his voice low. "I'm not sure kindness has much to do with it anymore." And just like that, the unspoken truth between them grew heavier, a promise, a danger, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The morning was unusually still, the kind of stillness that made the hair on the back of Ethan Cole's neck stand on end. He was stacking firewood when the sound reached him, distant, rhythmic, like a heartbeat against the earth. Hooves. 3 horses, maybe 4, riding hard. He straightened slowly, squinting toward the horizon. Over the rise, dark silhouettes emerged, their figures growing sharper against the pale Wyoming sky. 3 riders, their hats pulled low, dust curling behind them like smoke from a brush fire. "Mary," Ethan called, his voice tight, "get inside." She stepped out of the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it?" "Riders," he said, not taking his eyes off the horizon. His tone left no room for doubt. Mary's breath caught. She followed his gaze, and the moment she saw them, color drained from her face. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her apron. "They found me," she whispered. Ethan turned sharply. "Who?" But she didn't answer, not yet. The riders slowed as they neared the gate, their horses snorting clouds of steam in the cool air. The lead rider, a lean man with a scar running from his ear to his jaw, grinned like a wolf scenting blood. A revolver gleamed at his hip. "Cole," he called out, voice cutting through the morning like a knife. "We know you've got her. Hand over Mary Whitlock and we'll leave peaceful." Ethan's grip tightened on the axe handle in his hand. He stepped forward, planting his boots in the dirt. "You're on my land. Speak your business and then ride out." The scarred man's grin widened. "Our business is her,
Ain't that right, sweetheart?" Mary flinched as his gaze pinned her. She took a step back, but Ethan shifted to block the rider's line of sight. "You'll be leaving now," Ethan said, his voice cold and steady.
The second rider, stockier and mean-eyed, leaned forward in his saddle. "You don't want this fight, old man. Give her up and no harm done." Ethan's chest rose and fell with slow control. Behind him, Mary's breathing quickened. He didn't know what history lay between her and these men, but he knew one thing: they weren't leaving without trouble. "Get back inside, Mary," he murmured, low but firm. This was the point of no return. Mary didn't move toward the house. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, eyes locked on the scarred rider as if he were a ghost from a nightmare. Ethan noticed the tremor in her hands and stepped closer, his broad frame a shield between her and the men. "Who are they, Mary?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her silence. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling, as though she were fighting to find the words. They're from my husband's past," she said finally. "Before he died, he borrowed money from the wrong kind of men. I thought I left them behind in Cheyenne." Ethan's eyes narrowed, a storm brewing behind them.
"And you didn't think to mention this before?"
"I didn't want to drag you into it," she whispered, her voice heavy with guilt. "I thought if I stayed quiet, if I worked hard, maybe they wouldn't find me."
The lead rider chuckled darkly, overhearing enough to smirk. "She's a quick one, Cole, I'll give her that. But debts don't just vanish, and neither do we." Ethan stepped forward, his voice rising, steady and unshaken. "You're not taking her. Not today, not ever." Mary grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "Ethan, you don't have to do this. They'll kill you." He glanced down at her, and for the first time in years, his expression softened. "I've spent too long letting the world pass me by, Mary. I'm not letting them take what's right." She froze, the weight of his words sinking in. He wasn't just protecting her. He was making a choice, one that would cost him dearly if he failed. The scarred man's smile faltered, his tone turning cold. "Last chance, Cole. Hand her over, or we'll take her from your grave." Ethan's hand went to the rifle propped against the fence post. In that moment, Mary saw something in him she hadn't seen before, a fierce determination, like a man waking from a long slumber. "Go inside," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Lock the door." Mary hesitated, then whispered, "I'm tired of running." Her words made him pause for a fraction of a second. Then, with a slow nod, he handed her a heavy shovel from the barn. "Then you stand with me." The riders waited just beyond the gate, their horses stamping nervously, snorting plumes of mist into the chill air. The scarred man tipped his hat back, watching Ethan with a predator's patience. "You've got one chance to make this easy," he called out, his tone dripping with threat. Ethan ignored him. He turned to Mary, his voice low and deliberate. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they try something stupid. You know how to load a rifle?" Mary shook her head, gripping the shovel as if it were her lifeline. "I've never fired a gun in my life." "Then stay close to the barn. If anyone comes near you, swing that shovel hard. Don't hesitate." He grabbed a cartridge belt from the porch rail and checked his Winchester rifle, his movements sharp and precise.
Inside the barn, the cows shifted restlessly, sensing the tension in the air. Bessie let out a low, uneasy moo. Mary knelt to soothe her, running a hand along her neck. "Easy, girl," she murmured. "Don't let the noise spook you," Ethan said, setting an extra box of cartridges on the hay bale. "I'll try to keep them outside the fence. If they breach it—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "We fight." Mary straightened, eyes flashing with determination. "I'm not hiding this time, Ethan. I'm done being afraid." He met her gaze and saw no fear there, only resolve. Something inside him shifted. For years he had lived like a ghost, a man defined by what he'd lost. But now, with Mary standing beside him, he felt alive again. The riders made their move. The stocky one dismounted, rattling the gate as he drew his revolver. "This is your last warning, Cole," he barked. Ethan stepped out from the barn, rifle in hand, the barrel glinting in the rising sun. "You want her?" he called, his voice like steel. "Come and try." The scarred man grinned. "Have it your way." With a sharp signal, the other two riders spurred their horses forward, kicking up clouds of dust as they charged toward the fence.
Mary's grip tightened on the shovel, her breath shallow but steady. "Ethan," she whispered. "I see them," he replied, raising the rifle to his shoulder. The first shot cracked through the morning, echoing across the valley. The rifle's thunder split the silence, and the lead rider's hat flew off as the bullet skimmed past his head. His horse reared, hooves lashing the air, nearly throwing him. He cursed and yanked the reins, circling wide for another approach. "Stay low," Ethan barked, cycling the lever of the Winchester and firing again. This time, the shot grazed the arm of the stocky rider, who let out a howl of pain and dropped his revolver into the dust. Mary crouched by the barn door, clutching the shovel with white knuckles. Every gunshot made her flinch, but she stayed rooted in place, eyes fixed on Ethan. He moved with a precision she hadn't seen before, his stance steady, his breath measured. One of the riders broke formation, circling toward the barn. Mary's heart pounded as she realized he was coming straight for her. She gritted her teeth, stepping out from the shadowed doorway. "Back away!" she shouted, raising the shovel like a spear.
The man laughed, spurring his horse closer. "You think you can stop me with that thing?" He swung down from the saddle, reaching for her. In that instant, Mary lunged, swinging the shovel with all her strength. The metal blade struck his chest with a hollow thud, knocking him back against the side of the barn. He staggered, clutching his ribs, stunned more by her ferocity than the blow itself. Ethan saw the commotion and fired a warning shot over the man's head. "Get your hands off her!" he roared, his voice carrying a deadly promise. The scarred leader snarled and urged his horse forward again, bullets snapping through the air as he fired blindly at the ranch house. Splinters of wood flew from the fence post inches from Ethan's shoulder. He dropped to one knee, reloaded, and squeezed off another shot, this one striking the ground near the horse's hooves. The animal reared in panic, nearly throwing the rider. Mary's breathing came in quick bursts, but she didn't back down. She swung the shovel again as the wounded rider tried to rise, forcing him to retreat toward his horse. Ethan advanced from behind the corral fence, his rifle trained on the leader. "You ride out now," he growled, "or you won't ride out at all." The stocky rider, blood seeping through his sleeve, cursed under his breath. "Boss, we're not winning this." The scarred man glared at Ethan, hatred burning in his eyes. "This ain't over," he spat. "You'll both regret this." The scarred leader's horse snorted and pawed at the dirt as he reined it back, his jaw clenched tight. For a long moment, it seemed he might charge again. Ethan kept the Winchester leveled on him, his finger steady on the trigger, every muscle poised like a drawn bow. The leader's eyes flicked to his men. One was nursing a bleeding arm, the other limping as he scrambled onto his horse, the mark of Mary's shovel still red on his chest. The odds were no longer in their favor, and he knew it. "This isn't done, Cole," the leader snarled.
His voice was low, the words rolling out like thunder before a storm. "You've bought yourself a few hours, maybe a day, but we'll be back. And when we come, we'll burn this place to the ground." Ethan didn't blink. "You'll try," he said evenly, "and I'll be here waiting." For a moment, neither man moved.
Then the leader yanked the reins and wheeled his horse around. The other two followed, spurring their mounts hard as they rode off, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the air long after they disappeared over the ridge. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of Ethan's ragged breathing. His shoulders relaxed, but his grip on the rifle remained tight. Mary emerged from behind the barn, her face pale, her hair wild from the struggle. She was still clutching the shovel, her hands trembling but firm. "They're gone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Ethan muttered, scanning the horizon. "But they'll be back. Men like that don't let go." He turned to her, eyes burning with something fierce, part anger, part concern. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start? I needed to know what we were up against." Mary looked down at her hands, the metal of the shovel streaked with dust. "Because I thought I could outrun it," she admitted. "I didn't want you dragged into my mess, but—" She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I see now that running won't save me, not anymore." Ethan's jaw tightened, but there was no judgment in his eyes, only resolve.
"Then we prepare," he said. "Next time, we won't just scare them off, we'll end it." The ranch was quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that lingered now was sharp-edged, heavy with the memory of gunfire and hooves pounding against the earth. Ethan leaned the Winchester against the porch post and flexed his shoulder, feeling the dull ache from where a bullet had splintered wood too close to his skin. A graze, nothing more, but a reminder of how close it had been. Mary sat on the porch steps, her hands still gripping the handle of the shovel. She stared at the dust clouds in the distance where the riders had vanished. Her breath came in shallow waves, as though her body hadn't caught up to the fact that it was over, for now. "Let me see your hand," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "I'm fine," she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. "You're bleeding," he said firmly, pointing to the small cut across her palm. She must have nicked herself on the metal of the shovel. Without waiting for her protest, he fetched a cloth and dipped it in the water barrel. The cool dampness against her skin made her flinch, but she didn't pull away. Ethan wrapped the cloth carefully, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. "You hit him hard," he said with a faint smirk. "Didn't think you had it in you." Mary let out a shaky laugh. "Neither did I." They sat there in silence for a while, the only sound the creak of the windmill and the low calls of the cattle in the pasture. The air smelled of dust and gunpowder. Mary's eyes moved across the yard, the churned-up dirt, the scattered wood from the splintered fence, and she sighed. "I can't let them do this to you, Ethan," she said quietly. "This is my fight, not yours." Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. "You came here to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. Well, standing sometimes means fighting, and I'm not about to let them take you or this land." Mary met his eyes and found no hesitation there, only a man who had already made his choice. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ranch, Ethan stood and checked his rifle again. "Tonight we plan," he said. "If they come back, we'll be ready." Mary rose to her feet, her face pale but set with determination. "Then I'll stand with you." The last of the day's light stretched across the plains, turning the Wyoming sky into a canvas of deep gold and violet. Ethan and Mary stood by the broken fence, the silence between them thick with unspoken words.
The dust from the riders had long since settled, but the echo of their threat still lingered, heavy as a storm waiting on the horizon. Ethan ran a calloused hand over the splintered post. "Tomorrow we'll fix this fence," he said, almost absently. "But tonight we rest. We'll need our strength if they come back." Mary nodded, but her eyes stayed on the road that wound toward Cheyenne, her fingers brushing over the edge of her father's Bible, which she now carried tucked under her arm. "I used to think faith meant praying for the storm to pass," she said softly. "But maybe faith is learning to stand firm when the storm comes." Ethan looked at her, the fading light catching in his eyes. "You stood firm today. You didn't run." "I had someone worth standing with," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They moved to the porch, where Ethan fetched a small first aid kit. He carefully cleaned the graze on his shoulder, while Mary brought warm water from the kitchen. The quiet moments felt different now, less like the silence of strangers and more like the calm that follows a battle, where every breath is a reminder of survival. Mary handed him the cloth, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said, her tone filled with a sincerity that seemed to hang in the air between them. "You didn't have to do what you did today." Ethan paused, looking down at her hand before meeting her gaze. "You're wrong. I did. Because if there's one thing I learned out here on this land, it's that some things are worth fighting for." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. As night fell, the two of them stood on the porch, side by side, watching the last of the sunset fade into the horizon. The wind carried the scent of rain from the distant hills, and for a moment the ranch felt almost peaceful again. Mary's voice broke the silence. "Do you think they'll come back tonight?" Ethan rested a hand on the rifle leaning against the wall. "If they do," he said, his voice steady, "they'll find us ready." If you like this video, please comment number 0. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The sun was low in the sky, a heavy orange disk bleeding into the Wyoming plains. The ranch bore the scars of the morning's battle, splintered fence posts, churned earth, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingering in the air. Ethan Cole stood by the gate, one hand resting on the rough wood, staring at the horizon where the riders had vanished hours ago. His jaw was set hard, as though carved from the same timber as the fence he leaned on. Mary approached quietly, her boots crunching over the dirt. She had washed the blood and grime from her hands, but there was no washing away the weight in her eyes. She stopped beside him, her gaze following his. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked, her voice hushed. Ethan didn't answer right away. He'd been listening to the wind, to the uneasy silence of the land. "Men like that," he finally said, "they don't forget. They'll come back when they think we're weakest." Mary tightened her grip on the worn handle of her father's Bible. "Then I should go," she said softly.
"They want me, not you. If I leave, maybe they'll leave you alone." Ethan turned to her, his face shadowed in the fading light. "And where would you go, Mary? Back to Cheyenne? Back to running from ghosts?" His voice softened, but there was a rough edge of truth in it. "You came here because you wanted something better, because you wanted to stand on your own feet." She hesitated, her lips trembling. "I did, but I never meant for you to get hurt. I can't stay here if it means putting you in danger." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze steady, unflinching. "You think I've spent 20 years living alone because I was afraid of danger?" He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "No, I was afraid of feeling anything worth fighting for again. You've changed that." Mary blinked, surprised by the honesty in his words. He took a deep breath, as if the act of speaking it aloud had lifted something from his chest. "You're not leaving, Mary," he said, his voice low but firm. Not if you want this land to mean something, and not if you want me to fight beside you." The silence between them stretched, heavy but warm. Then Mary nodded, a quiet strength settling over her. "I'm tired of running, Ethan.
"If they come back, I'll stand here with you." "Good," he said simply. For the first time since the fight, a faint smile touched his lips. As the sun dipped lower, Ethan gathered 2 wooden chairs and set them on the porch. "Sit," he said. "We've got something to do." Mary frowned. "What?" "Pray," he said, his tone almost shy. "It's been a long time since I asked God for anything, but tonight feels like a good place to start." Mary's eyes softened. She set her Bible on her lap, fingers tracing the worn leather cover. Together they bowed their heads, the golden light of dusk washing over them. Ethan's voice was rough, uncertain, but strong enough to carry through the quiet air. "If God brought us here," he said slowly, "He'll see us through. We ask for strength, for courage, and for the will to keep what's worth keeping." Mary's whisper followed, steady and full of conviction. "Amen." They sat there as the sky deepened into purple and indigo, the first stars glimmering like distant lanterns. Neither spoke, but they didn't need to. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the kind of peace that comes when a man stops running from his own heart.
The next morning, the ranch woke under a sky washed clean by the night's wind. The scent of damp earth and hay filled the air, and the mountains stood clear and sharp in the distance. Ethan was already at work repairing the fence where bullets had splintered the posts. His movements were steady, deliberate, like a man not just fixing wood and wire, but setting his mind in order. Mary came out of the barn with a bucket of water, her hair still damp from washing. There were shadows under her eyes, but her expression carried a quiet fire. She placed the bucket down beside him and knelt to hold a post steady. "You don't have to help with this," Ethan said, glancing at her. Mary gave a small smile. "If this is going to be my home too, I do." The words hung between them for a moment, soft but with the weight of a promise. Ethan looked at her, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building something that mattered. By noon, the fence was standing straight again. Mary wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dust across her cheek. Ethan chuckled softly, reaching over to brush it away with his thumb. The brief contact sent a warmth through them both, and for a moment neither moved. "Ethan," she said quietly, "thank you for everything." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "This land, it's not just mine anymore. It feels like it belongs to both of us now." Mary's gaze lingered on his, steady and searching. "You really believe we can hold it? That we can face whatever comes?" Ethan looked out across the open plains, where the horizon stretched endless and wild. "I believe in hard work. I believe in standing your ground. And," he paused, turning back to her, "I believe in you." As evening settled, they stood at the wooden gate, side by side, looking out at the road that cut through the valley. The sky blazed with a fiery sunset, streaks of crimson and gold reflecting in Mary's eyes. "Do you hear that?" she asked softly. Ethan tilted his head. Far off in the distance, faint but distinct, came the rhythmic echo of hoofbeats. They were too far to tell if they were friend or foe, but both of them knew that life in the Wyoming wilds would always bring new storms. "Could be them," Ethan muttered. Mary's hand found his, fingers lacing with a quiet certainty. "Then let them come. We'll be ready." He glanced at her, his rough, battle-worn hand tightening around hers. "We'll be ready," he echoed, his voice carrying a promise not just of protection, but of something deeper, something he'd thought he'd buried decades ago.
They lingered at the gate as the sun slipped beneath the hills, the last light catching the silver threads in Ethan's hair and the soft determination in Mary's face. The wind stirred the prairie grass, whispering like a prayer through the valley. "Funny," Ethan said after a long pause. "For the first time in years, this place doesn't feel so empty anymore." Mary smiled, leaning slightly against his arm. "That's because it isn't. Sometimes all it takes is two stubborn souls to make a home." Ethan nodded, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Then I guess this is home." The distant hoofbeats faded into the dark, swallowed by the vastness of the plains. And though the threat was not gone, neither was the strength they had found together. The story of Ethan Cole and Mary Whitlock didn't end there. It had only begun, carried forward on faith, courage, and the promise of a brighter dawn.
Ride with us through the untamed spirit of the Wild West, where every story is a whisper of courage, loss, and hope. Subscribe to our True Wild West Stories series, where fading sunsets, dusty trails, and unspoken dreams echo the timeless heartbeat of human resilience and love.